Hello and welcome back. Today is January 2nd, 2025, and we are reading Chapter 1 of Abhorsen by Garth Nix today. So I am so excited to start reading this chapter. It's fairly long, so I'll try to keep my introduction short, but I did want to say that I'm so excited to start making these new videos. I know I talked about them a little bit yesterday. My goal for this year is to post my first vlog mini movie on February 1st after we finish this book. So I'm planning on taking little videos here and there. I just started outlining everything today, figuring out what I want to create, and I think I'm going to make a little preview trailer for it, because I was the last book I made a trailer for Lirael, and I made a little short when I started reading Sabriel that was starring Ray. But this time I think I'm going to just make a little snippet for my mini movie I'm going to create. So stay tuned. February 1st, that's my goal. That's when I'd like to have it finished and posted. So fingers crossed. But anyways, today we're reading Abhorsen, so let's get into it. Chapter 1. A House Besieged. There was another fog, far away from the smog of Corvir, 600 miles to the north, across the wall that separated Ancelstir from the Old Kingdom. The wall where the Old Kingdom's magic really began, and Ancelstir's modern technology failed. This fog was different from its far southern cousin. It was not white, but the dark gray of a storm cloud, and it was completely unnatural. This fog had been spun from air and free magic, and was born on a hilltop far from any water. It survived and spread despite the heat of a late spring afternoon, which should have burned it into nothing. Ignoring sun and light breezes, the fog spread from the hill and rolled south and east, thin tendrils creeping out in advance of the main body. Half a league on from the hill, one of these tendrils separated into a cloud that rose high in the air and crossed the mighty river Raderlin. Once across, it sank to sit like a toad on the eastern bank, and new fog begun to puff out of it. Soon, the two arms of fog shrouded both western and eastern shores of the Raderlin, though the sun still shone on the river in between. Both river and fog sped at their very different paces towards the long cliffs. The river dashed along, getting faster and faster as it headed to the great waterfall, where it would plunge down more than 1,000 feet. The fog was slow and threatening. It thickened and rose higher as it rolled on. A few yards before it reached the long cliffs, the fog stopped, though it still grew thicker and rose higher, threatening the island that sat in the middle of the river and on the edge of the waterfall, an island with high white walls that enclosed a house and gardens. The fog did not spread across the river, nor lean in too far as it rose. There were unseen defenses that held it back, that kept the sun shining on the white walls, the gardens, and the red-tiled house. The fog was a weapon, but it was only the first move in a battle, only the beginning of a siege. The battle lines were drawn, and the house invested. For the whole river-circled isle was Abhorsen's house, home of the Abhorsen, whose birthright and charge was to maintain the borders of life and death. The Abhorsen, who used necromantic bells and free magic, but who was neither necromancer nor free magic sorcerer. The Abhorsen, who sent any dead who trespassed in life back to whence they came. The creator of the fog knew that the Abhorsen was not actually in the house. The Abhorsen and her husband, the king, had been lured across the wall, and would presumably be dealt with there. That was part of her master's plan, long since laid, but only recently begun in earnest. The plan had many parts, in many countries, though the very heart and reason for it lay in the Old Kingdom. War, assassination, and refugees were elements of the plan, all manipulated by a scheming, subtle mind that had waited generations for everything to come to fruition. But as with any plan, There had already been complications and problems. 2 of them were in the house. One was a young woman who had been sent south by the witches who lived in the glacier-clad mountain at the Readalong source. The Claire, who saw many futures in the ice, and who would certainly try to twist the present to their own ends. The woman was one of their elite mages, easily identified by the colored waistcoat she wore, a red waistcoat, marking her as a second assistant librarian. The maker of the fog had seen her, black-haired and pale-skinned, surely no older than 20, a mere fingernail sliver of an age. She had heard the young woman's name called out in desperate battle, Lirael. The other complication was better known, and possibly more trouble, though the evidence was conflicting. A young man, hardly more than a boy, curly-haired from his father, black-eyebrowed from his mother, and tall from both. His name was Samuth, the royal son of King Touchstone and the Abhorsen Sabriel. Prince Samuth was meant to be the Abhorsen in waiting, heir to the powers of the Book of the Dead and the 7 Bells, but the maker of the fog doubted that now. She was very old, and once she had known a great deal about the strange family and their house in the river. She had fought Samuth barely a night past, and he had not fought like an Abhorsen. Even the way he cast his charter magic was strange, reminiscent of neither the royal line nor the Abhorsens. Samuth and Lirael were not alone. They were supported by 2 creatures who appeared to be no more than a small, bad-tempered white cat and a large black and tan dog of friendly disposition. Yet both were much more than they seemed, though exactly what they were was another slippery piece of information. Most likely, they were free magic spirits of some kind, bound in service to the Abhorsen and the Claire. The cat was known to some degree. His name was Mogget, and there was speculation about him in certain books of lore. The dog was a different matter. She was new, or so old that any book that told of her was long since dust. The creature in the fog thought the latter. Both the young woman and her hound had come from the great library of the Claire. It was likely both of them, like the library, had hidden depths and contained unknown powers. Together, these 4 could be formidable opponents, and they represented a serious threat. But the maker of the fog did not have to fight them directly, nor could she, for the house was too well guarded by both spell and swift water. Her orders were to make sure that they were trapped in the house. The house was to be besieged while matters progressed elsewhere, until it was too late for Lirael, Sam, and their companions to do anything at all. Clore of the Mask hissed as she thought of those orders, and fog billowed around what passed for her head. She had once been a living necromancer, and she took orders from no one. She had made a mistake that had led to her servitude and death. But her master had not let her go to the 9th gate and beyond. She had been returned to life, though not in any living form. She was a dead creature now, caught by the power of bells, bound by her secret name. She did not like her orders, yet had no choice but to obey. Clore lowered her arms. A few feathery tendrils of fog issued from her fingers. There were dead hands all around her, hundreds and hundreds of swaying, suppurating corpses. Clore had not brought the spirits that inhabited these rotten half-skeletal bodies out of death, but she had been given command of them by the one who had. She raised one thin, long arm of shadow and pointed. With sighs and groans and gurgles and the clicking of frozen joints and broken bones, the dead hands marched forward, sending the fog swirling all around them. "There are at least 200 dead hands on the western bank, and 80 or more to the east," reported Samuth. He straightened up from behind the bronze telescope and swung it down out of the way. "I couldn't see Clore, but she must be there somewhere, I guess." He shivered as he thought of the last time he'd seen Clore, a thing of malignant darkness looming above him, her flaming sword about to fall. That had been only the night before, though it already felt much longer ago. It's possible some other free magic sorcerer could have raised the mist, said Lirael. But she didn't believe it. She could sense the same brooding power out there that she'd felt last night. Fog, said the disreputable dog, who was delicately balanced on the observer's stool. Apart from the fact that she could talk, and the bright collar made of charter marks around her neck, she looked just like any other large black and tan mongrel dog, the kind that smiled and wagged their tails more than they barked and growled. I think it has thickened sufficiently to be called Fog. The dog, her mistress, Lirael, Prince Samuth, and the Abhorsen's cat-shaped servant, Mogget, were all in the observatory that occupied the topmost floor of the tower on the northern side of Abhorsen's house. The observatory's walls were entirely transparent, and Lirael found herself taking nervous glances at the ceiling because it was hard to see if anything was holding it up. The walls were not glass either, or any material she knew, which somehow made it even worse. But she didn't want her nervousness to show, so Lirael turned her most recent twitch into a nod of agreement as the dog spoke. Only her hand betrayed her feelings, as she kept it resting on the dog's neck, for the comfort of warm dogskin and the charter magic in the dog's collar. Though it was only early afternoon, and the sun still shone directly down on the house, the island, and the river, there was a solid mass of fog on either bank, billowing up in sheer walls that kept on climbing and climbing, though they were already several hundred feet high. The fog was clearly sorcerous in origin. It had not risen from the river as a normal fog would, or come with lowering cloud. This fog had flowed in from the east and west at the same time, moving swiftly, regardless of the wind. Then, at first, it had grown thicker with every passing minute. A further indication of the fog's strangeness lay directly to the south, where it stopped sharply just before it might mix with the natural mist thrown up by the great waterfall, where the river flung itself over the long cliffs. The dead had come soon after the fog, lumbering corpses who climbed clumsily along the river banks, though they feared the swift flowing water. Something was driving them on, something hidden farther back in the fog. Almost certainly that something was Clore of the Mask, once a necromancer, now herself one of the greater dead. A very dangerous combination, Lirael knew, for Clore had probably retained much of her old sorceress knowledge of free magic, combined with whatever powers she had gained in death, powers that were likely to be dark and strange. Lirael and the dog had briefly driven Clore away in the last night's battle on the river bank, but it had not been a victory. Lirael could feel the presence of the dead and the sorcerous nature of the fog. Though Abhorsen's house was defended by deep running water and many magical wards and guards, she still shivered, as if a cold hand had trailed fingers across her skin. No one commented on the shiver, though Lirael felt embarrassed at how obvious it had been. No one said anything, but they were all looking at her. Sam, the dog, and Mogget, all waiting as if she were going to pronounce some great wisdom or insight. For a moment, Lirael felt a surge of panic. She wasn't used to taking the lead in conversation, or in anything else. But she was the Abhorsen in waiting now. While Sabriel was across the wall in Ancelstier, she was the only Abhorsen. The dead, the fog, and Clore were her problems. They were only minor problems compared to the real threat, whatever Hedge and Nicholas were digging up near the Red Lake. I'll have to pretend, thought Lirael. I'll have to act like an Abhorsen. Maybe if I act well enough, I'll come to believe it myself. Apart from the stepping stones, is there any other way out? She asked suddenly, turning south to look at the stones that were just visible under the water, leading out to both eastern and western banks. Stepping stones was not quite the right name, Lirael thought. Jumping stones would be more appropriate, as they were set at least 6 feet apart and very close to the edge of the waterfall. If you missed a jump, the river would snatch you up and the waterfall would throw you down a very long way, under a great weight of crushing water. Sam? Sam shook his head. Mogget? The little white cat was curled up on the blue and gold cushion that had briefly been on the observer's stool, before it was knocked off by a paw and put to better use on the floor. Mogget was not actually a cat, though he had the shape of one, The collar of charter marks with its miniature bell, Rana, the sleep-bringer, showed that he was much more than any simple talking cat. Mogget opened one bright green eye and yawned widely. Rana tinkled on his collar, and Lirael and Sam found themselves yawning as well. "Sabriel took the paper wing, so we cannot fly out," he said. "Even if we could fly, we'd have to get past the gore crows. I suppose we could call a boat, but the dead would follow us along the banks." Lirael looked out at the walls of fog. She'd been the Abhorsen in waiting for only 2 hours, and already she didn't know what to do, except that she had an absolute conviction that they must leave the house and hurry to the Red Lake. They had to find Sam's friend Nicholas and stop him from digging up whatever it was that was imprisoned deep beneath the earth. "There might be another way," said the dog. She jumped down from the stool and began to tread a circle near Mogget as she spoke, high-stepping, as if she were pressing down grass beneath her paws rather than cool stone. On "way," she suddenly collapsed onto the floor near the cat and slapped a heavy paw near the cat's head. "Though Mogget won't like it." "What way?" Mogget hissed, arching his back. "I know of no way out but the stepping stones, or the air above, or the river. And I've been here since the house was built." "But not when the river was split and the island made," said the dog calmly. "Before the wall-makers raised the walls, when the first Abhorsen's tent was pitched where the great fig grows now." "True," conceded Mogget, "but neither were you." There was a hint of a question or doubt in Mogget's last words, thought Lirael. She watched the disreputable dog carefully, but all the hound did was scratch her nose with both forepaws before continuing. "In any case, there was once another way. If it still exists, it is deep, and it could be dangerous in more ways than one. Some might say it would be safer to cross the stones and fight our way through the dead." "But not you?" asked Lirael. "You think there's an alternative?" Lirael was afraid of the dead, but not so much that she could not face them if she had to. She was just not entirely confident in her newfound identity. Perhaps an Abhorsen like Sabriel, in the full flower of her years and power, could simply leap across the stepping stones and put Clor, the Shadow Hands, and all the other dead to rout. Lirael thought if she tried that herself, she would end up retreating back across the stones and quite likely fall into the river and be smashed to pieces in the waterfall. "I think we should investigate it," pronounced the dog. She stretched out, almost hitting Mogget again with her paws, then slowly stood up and yawned, revealing many extremely large, very white teeth. All of this, Lirael was sure, was to annoy Mogget. Mogget looked at the dog through narrowed eyes. "Deep," mewed the cat. "Does that mean what I think it does? We cannot go there." "She's long gone," replied the dog, "though I suppose something might linger." "She?" asked Lirael and Samuth together. "You know the well in the rose garden?" asked the dog. Samuth nodded, while Lirael tried to remember if she'd seen a well as they'd crossed the island to the house. She did vaguely recall catching a glimpse of roses, many roses, sprawled across trellises that rose up past the eastern side of the lawn closest to the house. "It is possible to climb down the well," continued the dog, "though it is a long climb, and narrow. It will bring us to even deeper caves. There's a way through them to the base of the waterfall. Then we will have to climb back up the cliffs again, but I expect we will be able to do that farther west, bypassing Clor and her minions." "The well is full of water," said Sam. "We'll drown." "Are you sure?" asked the dog. "Have you ever looked in it?" "Well, no," said Sam. "It's covered, I think." "Who is the she you mentioned?" asked Lirael firmly. She knew very well from past experience when the dog was avoiding an issue. "Someone once lived down there," replied the dog. "Someone who had considerable and dangerous powers. There might be some remnant of her there." "What do you mean, someone?" asked Lirael sternly. "How could someone have lived deep underneath Abhorsen's house?" "I refuse to go anywhere near that well," interjected Mogget. I suppose it was Kaliel who thought to dig into forbidden ground. What use to add our bones to his in some dark corner of the depths? Lirael's gaze flicked across to Sam for an instant, then back to Mogget. She regretted it instantly, for it showed her own doubts and fears. Now that she was the Abhorsen in waiting, she had to set an example. Sam had been open about his fear of death and the dead, and his desire to hide out here in the heavily protected house. But he had overcome his fear, at least for now. How could Sam continue to be brave if she didn't set an example? Lyra was also his aunt. She didn't feel like an aunt, but she supposed that it carried certain responsibilities towards a nephew, even one who was only a few years younger than herself. "Dog!" ordered Lirael. "Answer me plainly for once. Who or what is down there?" "Well, it's difficult to put into words," said the dog. She shuffled her front paws again. "Particularly since there's probably no one down there at all. If there is, I suppose that you would call her a leftover from the creation of the Charter, as am I, and so many other of varying stature. But if she is there, or some part of her, then it's possible she is as she was, which is dangerous in a very elemental way, though it's all so long ago, and really, I'm only telling you what other people have said, or written, or thought." "Why would she be down there?" asked Samuel. "Why under Abhorsen's house?" "She's not exactly anywhere," replied the dog, who was now scratching her nose with one paw, and totally failing to meet anybody's eyes. "Part of her power is invested here, so if she were to be anywhere, it's likely to be here, and that's where, if she were anywhere, she'd be." "Mogget," asked Lirael, "can you translate anything the dog has said?" Mogget didn't answer. His eyes were shut. Somewhere in the space of the dog's answer, he had curled up and gone to sleep. "Mogget!" repeated Lirael. "He sleeps," said the dog. "Rana has called him into slumber." "I think he only listens to Rana when he feels like it," said Sam. "I hope Caragor sleeps more soundly." "We can look if you like," said the dog, "but I am sure we would know if he had woken. Rana has a lighter hand than Sereneth, but she holds tightly when she must. Besides, Caragor's power lay in his followers. His art was to draw upon them, and his downfall was to depend upon it." "What do you mean?" asked Lirael. "I thought he was a free magic sorcerer who had become one of the greater dead." "He was more than that," said the dog, "for he had the royal blood. Mastery of others ran deep in him. Somewhere in death, Caragor found the means to use the strength of those who swore allegiance to him, through the brand he burned upon their flesh. If Sabriel had not accidentally used a most ancient charm that severed him from his power, I think Caragor would have triumphed, for a time, at least." "Why only for a time?" asked Sam. He wished he had never mentioned Caragor in the first place. "I think he would eventually have done what your friend Nicholas is doing now," said the dog, "and dug up something best left alone." No one said anything to that. "We're wasting time," Lirael said finally. She looked out at the fog on the western bank again. She could feel many dead hands there, more than could be seen, though there were plenty enough of those. Rotting sentries, wreathed in fog, waiting for their enemy to come out. Lirael took a deep breath and made her decision. "If you think we should climb down the well, dog, then that is the way we will go. Hopefully we will not encounter whatever remnant of power lurks below. Or perhaps she will be friendly, and we can talk." "No!" barked the dog, surprising everyone. Even Mogget opened an eye, but, seeing Sam looking at him, hastily shut it again. "What?" asked Lirael. "If she is there, which is very unlikely, you mustn't speak to her," said the dog. "You must not listen to her, or touch her in any way." "Has anyone ever heard or touched her?" asked Sam. "No mortal," said Mogget, raising his head, "nor passed through her halls, I would guess. It is madness to try. I always wondered what happened to Kaliel." "I thought you were asleep," said Lirael. Besides, she might ignore us if we ignore her." "It is not her ill will I'm afraid of," said Mogget. "I fear her paying us any attention at all." "Perhaps we should," said Sam. "What?" asked Mogget nastily. "Stay here all nice and safe?" "No," replied Sam quietly. "If this woman's voice is so dangerous, then perhaps we should make earplugs before we go, out of wax or something." "It wouldn't help," said Mogget. "If she speaks, you will hear her through your very bones. If she sings, we'd best hope she will not sing." "We will avoid her," said the dog. "Trust to my nose. We will find our path." "Can you tell us who Caliel was?" asked Sam. "Caliel was the 12th Abhorsen," replied Mogget, "a most untrusting individual. He kept me locked up for years. The well must have been dug then. His grandson released me when Caliel disappeared, and he inherited his grandsire's bells and title. I do not wish to share Caliel's doom, particularly down a well." Lirael twitched as she suddenly felt some shift out in the fog. The brooding presence that had been lurking farther back was moving. She could sense it, a being far more powerful than the shadow hands who were beginning to flicker in and out of the edge of the fog. Clore was coming closer, almost down to the river bank. Or, if not Clore, someone of equal or greater power. Perhaps it was even the necromancer she had encountered in death. Hedge, the same necromancer who had burned Sam. Lirael could still see the scars on Sam's wrists through the slits in the sleeves of his surcoat. That surcoat was another mystery. For another day, Lirael thought wearily. A surcoat that quartered the royal towers with a device that had not been seen for millennia, the trowel of the wall makers. Sam caught her glance and picked at the heavy golden thread where the wall maker's symbol was woven through the linen. It was only slowly entering his head that the Sendings hadn't made a mistake with the surcoat. For a start, it was new made, not some old thing they'd dragged out of a musty cupboard or centuries-old laundry basket. So he probably was entitled to wear it for some reason. He was a wall maker as well as a royal prince. But what did that mean? The wall makers had disappeared millennia ago, putting themselves into the creation of the wall and the great charter stones. Quite literally, as far as Sam knew. For a moment, he wondered if that would be his destiny too. Would he have to make something that would end his life, at least as a living, breathing man? For the wall makers weren't exactly dead, Sam thought, remembering the great charter stones in the wall. They were more transformed or transfigured. Not that he fancied that either. In any case, he was far more likely to simply get killed, he thought, as he looked out to the fog and felt the cold presence of the dead within it. Sam touched the gold thread on his chest again and took comfort from it, his fear of the dead receding. He'd never wanted to be an Abhorsen. A wallmaker was much more interesting, even if he didn't know what it meant to be one. It would have the added benefit of driving his sister Elamir crazy, since she would never believe he didn't know and couldn't, rather than wouldn't, explain what it was to be a wallmaker. Presuming he ever saw Elamir again. "We'd best be moving," said the dog, startling both Lirael and Sam. Lirael had been staring out into the fog again too, lost in her own thoughts. "Yes," said Lirael, tearing her gaze away. Not for the first time, she wished she were back in the great library of the Clare. But that, like her lifelong wish to wear the white robes and the silver and moonstone crown of a fully fledged daughter of the Clare, had to be pushed away and buried deep. She was in Abhorsen now, and there was a great and momentous task ahead of her. "Yes," she repeated, "we'd best be moving. We will go by way of the well." And that is the end of chapter 1. Oh, that was so good. I hope you enjoyed that reading. I really enjoyed reading it. So I will post I will post chapter 2 tomorrow at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And until then, I'm going to go get some tea and rest my voice. My throat is a little sore after all that. Oh, I love this book so much. I'm so glad I decided to read this. I love how this first chapter really reads like a brand new book instead of like part 2 of Lirael, and I guess part 3 to Sabriel, because this is the sequel to Sabriel and Lirael. But anyways, I really like how if you haven't read these books before and you just started with these 2 chapters that we've read, well, chapter 1 and the prologue, it's still exciting. It's like a brand new book. But if you've been following along, you'll have known a lot of what we just talked about, and I can't wait to see what happens next in chapter 2. So come join me tomorrow evening at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And until then, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening. Take care. Do something fun. Have a great second day of our new year, 2025. The best year of our lives so far. So I'll see you tomorrow. Take care. And as always, may your magic manifest. Bye.